Hi guys, welcome to your Gargoyle tutorial. I know we had started on our lino cuts last week. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, we no longer have access to all of the materials, and that's something that unfortunately I cannot send home with you. So I did send them home with you. Please, if you have availability, continue working on them and for your own well-being. And we can always print them if and when school comes back into session, or next whenever I have access to seeing you again. If you need them for portfolio purposes in grade 12, of course, let me know and I can definitely try and arrange something. Other than that, we're going to move on to a additive sculpture, or your grotesque art, being the gargoyle. I've sent out some links on Google Classroom a couple of days ago in regards to what you can read up on and kind of some of the characteristics and expectations, as well as the history behind them. The purpose of that is to sort of start looking at some of the historical reminiscence or the different types of art that is out there falling under the gargoyles, and some of the different sort of key factors or features that we want to be trying to bring into our own sketch and design. I would like you to try and use authentic, artistic gargoyle statues versus your more commercial if possible, but definitely you can tailor them and tweak them to make them your own, as originality is key in this fashion. I don't want you pulling something up off the web and copying like I'm going to be doing. This is a gargoyle that's off of Notre Dame in France, and so just to make simplicity, being that I'm limited as far as my hand movement, I printed this off to kind of show you the steps and how we're going to be moving forward with this. So first step, find your gargoyles that you find inspirational. Second step is going to be making your sketch and finding a design. I do encourage you to not only sketch the front or one image, but kind of how is it going to look on the front, the side, maybe from the top, so that you can start getting some better ideas as far as how thick or thin depth. Because when I do get you to submit these, I will want to see multiple views, not just one angle, but I want to see that it actually has a three-dimensional appeal, which is what the intention of a gargoyle would have. They were animalistic, angry face, usually an open mouth because they were used as a water spout. So once you've got your drawing done, you're going to go ahead and you're going to find or sort of define the basic shapes within that particular animal. This is going to help you, or gargoyle, it's going to help you start to pick out how are you going to create the skeleton? How are you going to make this form, or finding that basic elemental form that you're going to start with the construction, and then starting to find or think outside the box to locate these items within your household or in the garbage or around town when you're out walking and just, you know, being socially distanced but enjoying some sunshine. And so then you can start to create this 1 by 1.5 foot. I don't want it to be too big because I only sent so much plaster cast home figure that you then are going to paint and create into a stone-like imagery. Okay, so that's step number 1 is finding your image, drawing your image, and then breaking it down, and then starting to pick apart and find supplies. Once you've gotten your supplies and you sort of arrange things, so for mine, as I said, I'm using this one from Notre Dame. I've gone ahead and I've basically constructed, let's see if it falls off, okay, I've basically constructed this shape without the beak. It's a general form using sock and newspaper. Okay, I also used for the main body, or sort of that belly form, I went over to the dollar store and I picked up a foam ball. Okay, other things that could be useful to derive would be your standard cardboard. That's always something that's useful. For the beak, I actually went and I used an egg carton container, and so you can see how I've created the beak afterwards, so I haven't put it on yet. You can get foam board. Again, socks, old socks that come out, don't take new socks, but old socks that you've got one that has a hole in it and the other one's useless, they're great for stuff like this. If somebody has some nylons that have been run through, This is great because you can kind of, like a sock puppet, stuff it and then create your shape exactly how you want it. If you need to start constricting or moving and holding things in places, elastic bands work really well to sort of mount it down. And then for mine, I actually used modeling clay for the feet. If you are going to be using modeling clay, the feet is about the extent of what you can use it for, because the purpose of the skeleton is to be lightweight. Balloons work really well if you can have access to those. I know the dollar store has them for sale. You can blow them up and kind of rearrange them as need be and use them, and then the balloon pops and you end up with this hollow structure once the plaster cast is done. So step 2 would be to find these items and put them together to create the skeletal form that you're going to be building off on. Once you're ready to start plastering, there's a couple things you need to look at as far as setup. First, you're at home. This stuff is messy. Please get a big garbage bag or some sort of a sheet of plastic and put yourself in a position where you're not going to be creating any havoc within the household. So if you have like an unfinished basement or a garage, that might be a better place to do this particular work. Otherwise, large garbage bag over top of whatever surface to ensure that you can do cleanup pretty efficiently, because the white powder does get everywhere. You're going to want a pair of scissors, okay? Preferably something that you don't mind getting dirty, so not good sewing scissors or, you know, the one that is in the knife block, because they will get covered in plaster. Okay, and then you want a tray of water. Okay, so I've got my little white tray here. The meat trays that you can buy, those little tin foil trays, work fantastically for this, as long as it's enough that you can sort of lay your pieces in and then pull them out rather quickly. You don't want anything too deep. Okay, it's just got to be like a little bit of a baking tray. And then last but not least, all your plaster. Now your plaster itself, I'm just going to move the camera over here. I'd like you to try and cut it off into different chunks. You're going to want some bigger stuff. Okay, so where it's a large sheet to sort of drape. You're going to want some mid-sized stuff, and you're definitely going to want some little pieces. So prior to even starting, get everything cut, get everything prepared, because once your hands get wet, everything turns into a mess. Okay?
Just a reminder to staff that if you have anything in the refrigerators in the staff room, could you stop by and clean them out?
Tools like tongue dispensers, chopsticks, skewers, any kind of a clay machine, anything that you can kind of use to get into crevices or help form your plaster in the long run will be beneficial to you. Set yourself up so that you do not have to leave your table once you get started. Okay, so you kind of get in, you start plastering. When you get up to leave is when you clean everything up and you walk away without tracing white powder throughout the house. So it's kind of try and stay where you are. If you have a smock or an old t-shirt to throw over top of yourself that you can kind of just put into that plastic bag and put off to the side, or if you have a work area that you can leave active for the entire duration until this is completed, that would be even better. Okay, so once you've got this form, what do we do? Okay, you're going to go ahead and you're going to start by basically just creating that base shape by covering the whole thing with a single layer of plaster. Now, how does that look? It's going to depend on how yours sort of sits and how these plaster pieces are going to fold over. You want to make sure that the plaster pieces themselves, if you are crossing them, are going to be crossed over by at least 2 inches so that the plaster adheres to the plaster. The second thing you're going to want to watch for is you can see there's all these lovely little holes. When we get this wet, that plaster is going to activate. You want to make sure that you're smoothing everything in so that it stays smooth and concise and that all that plaster gets worked into your skeletal form. Otherwise, when it dries, it's just going to break apart. So you want to try and like morph them together or merge them together. So taking your plaster, dropping it into the water, 1, 2. Okay, you want to make sure that it has enough water that it can actually be spread, and then I'm going to go ahead and just drape it onto my sculpture. Now, the first couple pieces are a little bit not great because there's nothing for it to stick to. You can see down at the bottom it's kind of fallen off every so often. It's because it's not going to stick to the sock as well as it will stick to other plaster. But I'm still going to smooth it out a little bit so that it kind of looks a little more uniform and there's less holes. Okay. And then I can go ahead and grab my next piece. Okay, 1, 2. Don't need a lot of water, too much water, and it's going to give you a lot of problems. Okay. And then same thing, smoothing it in. You can see that there's some wrinkles up in here. This is a material. Smooth it down, make sure that everything sort of sits nice and flat so that you don't end up with hard crevices later on that you're now going to be dealing with. Okay. And that's about it. It's more or less continually building it up to get that nice, smooth, hard rock surface that will give you the form. Now, you could see in my picture that I've got the beak, and I've got wings, and I've got some various other sort of finer details that need to be applied, and they're not in my form. So the answer to that is that, as I said, plaster sticks better to plaster. So my plan in this is that I'm going to be creating this base form, and then I will stick the beak on and the wings on once I get a thin layer of plaster so that it sticks nicer, or it sticks more efficiently to the body itself. Because otherwise, if I put the wings on, then I've got to somehow stitch them on, I've got to somehow figure out how to glue them on, and then I've got to try and get plaster underneath and around the wings. This way I'm creating a solid body, and then the wings themselves, I can plaster them ahead of time if I want to, and then stick them on and then plaster again to make them adhere. Or I can I'm going to play it by ear. There's no wrong way to do this. It's kind of a just, let's cast a fake skeleton body that we've created. The big thing is making sure that the plaster, when it dries, is sticking to itself. And that means lots of overlap, and you can see lots of smoothing to make it that nice, creamy white, no holes type structure. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with that. You can get started as need, and then I will hopefully put up a bit of a speed through on me creating this process, so you can kind of watch it if you'd like. And from there, we'll talk about painting in the next video. If you have any questions, email me. Email is probably the best. And then more or less we can go through whatever individual problem you may be experiencing. And we can kind of go from there, okay? So I would like to see draft drawings and preliminary structures made by the end of next week. You'll have 3 weeks for this particular assignment, so it'll be next week, then you'll have spring break, and then you'll have 1 more week after that. So it would be nice to see sort of the preliminary done by mid to end of next week, and then I know it's spring break, but since we're on a staycation, if you can try and get the plaster concluded, then we can start looking at painting and the fine-tuning the last week of the sort of assignment, okay? So have fun, don't make too big of a mess, and we'll talk again soon.